issues. The Prime Minister also tried to frame the Gorton and Denton by-election next month as a straight fight between Reform and Labour, over fears of the Green Party splitting the vote on the left. Although both Reform and the Greens were 13,000 votes away from winning Gorton and Denton last time, there were only 250 votes between them. The BBC has apologised for reducing its coverage of Holocaust Memorial Day without referring to the murder of Jews. The presenter said the day was remembering the 6 million people murdered by the Nazi regime over 80 years ago. We will have a full news roundup at 1 p.m, but now live on Times Radio and the Times YouTube channels, it's time for this.
PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio. Unpacking the politics and cutting through the crossfire.
And I'm joined as always by Times chief political commentator Patrick Maguire. Hello, Patrick.
Hello, Hugo.
How are you keeping?
I'm all right, yeah.
You sad not to be in China?
I'd love to have gone to China, but I'm grateful that the contents of my phone, laptop, inside leg measurement suitcase are not going to be inputted into the CCP central database, as may be the case for valued colleagues and ministers.
You say that, but I bet they're reading it here.
They've already got it.
We've also got a special guest this week. He is Chris Ward. He was one of Keir Starmer's closest and longest-serving aides in opposition. He's now a Labour MP and he's Parliamentary Secretary for the Cabinet Office. Chris, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
Good to have you with us. So, look, what would you normally be doing on a Wednesday when the PM is not in China?
Well, when he's not in China, we're doing PMQs prep, so I'm still part of his prep team. And this time, around 12 o'clock, is about the most nervous time of the week.
So like, for other people coming on live radio might be stressful. For you, you're like, this is just a walk in the park.
This is a lovely day off to be doing punditry rather than being at the front line of it. But yeah, this is the most nervous bit of the week because you've spent the morning with him prepping. You spent a lot of yesterday evening doing it as well. And then you're in that bit just before he goes on. I was going to say goes on stage, but goes into the Commons, and you're always a bit nervous about what's going to happen. But
Chris, sorry, Hugo. On a day like this, when the Deputy Prime Minister's doing it, obviously the PM's political advisors are they still in the room? Like, you're not in the room, but yours and Keir's is a special relationship. Are the number 10 political team still feeding in, saying these are lines we're going to land against Reform this week, or is it in the hands of David Lammy's able advisors?
It's a bit of both. There's still the number 10 briefing team and press team will help. And some of the Labour Party staff as well. But David will also have his special advisors that come in the room as well. So it's up to the person to pick. But it's kind of a combination. There's also some civil servants who basically are the brains of the operation, who will have a lot of
who fill the binder with policy detail, etc.
You say it's easier for you being here. The PM, of course, he gets accused of being never here, Keir. Is it easier for him not being here as well?
Well, he always says he doesn't enjoy PMQs, but he does like. Ultimately, he does like the sort of gladiatorial nature of it. So I think he will miss not doing it. But look, the China visit is a very important visit. So he's off doing other things today. But
he won't be at all relieved to be not doing it.
I mean, he will be relieved not to have to spend as much time as he does doing prep on it.
Yeah, that's not really what I'm asking.
But no, I think actually, as I say, he always says he doesn't enjoy it, but. He really does actually enjoy the challenge of it, and it gets it's his chance in the week to set out his position to his backbenchers, to the country as well. So it's a good chance to do that, and it's very different when you have the deputy in the chair. Of course.
It seems that he has. I think we've discussed this many times, Chris, but the Prime Minister is a confidence player, and when it seems he's confident of the stakes of his answers to questions, and right now the clearest answer he has to the questions of British politics is Reform are dangerous. The Tories don't have the answers, and I am, a serious man for serious times. It seems when he is confident in his own position and his answers to questions and where he's going, and it seems he is at the moment, he does give the impression of a man who enjoys it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, PMQs is always a reflection of where the parties are in general, right? And when you're in a difficult situation, PMQs is always harder. When we have a Wednesday where, Mandelson's resigning or the briefing thing was coming out on a Wednesday morning, that's obviously going to make PMQs harder. Whereas last week, where Keir was, in a really, I think you guys said on here it was his strongest week, he was in a really strong position with his argument with on Greenland and his position on NATO. He was very clear in his mind on that. But look, every week he'll have an argument he wants to land. David will have that today. That will be a bit about the by-election, but there's a bruise they want to punch about defections all the time, and Reform becoming or rather the Conservatives becoming a feeder club for reform, if you want to put it in football terms. But also the Conservatives, of course, will have the narrative they want to land, which will be around the internal psychodrama of the week. So that's always going to be the competition. Keir ultimately does enjoy that challenge and having his chance to put it. So I think he'll miss it ultimately.
On the psychodrama, and I appreciate that's not what you're here for, so I'll leave you alone in this regard in a minute. But I mean, on the whole Andy Burnham thing, what's the mood been like about that in Number 10? Is there a sort of a sense of like, this is just annoying? Is there anger at him? What is there?
I think the main bit would be a little bit of frustration, really, because, as you say, last week I thought was his best PMQs. It's exactly what I said to him straight after it. I think you guys said that as well. He'd had a really good week. The government had, both with where he got to with Trump on some issues, but also domestically. We'd rolled out warm homes, some send policy that's really been well received. And, you know, as the Prime Minister keeps saying, every minute we're not talking about the cost of living is a minute we're wasting. And we've wasted a lot of minutes since Wednesday because of that issue that has come up. So I think probably frustration that it's another reason that we're not talking on message. We're not talking back to cost of living and where he wants to get to. It's rather than anger or anything else.
OK. Patrick, the Tories are represented today by Andrew Griffith. What can you tell us about him?
He is the shadow business minister. He is... Yeah, look, he's the shadow business secretary.
Right.
And he's been banging on a lot.
You can say that a third time if you want, if that's as far as it goes.
The shadow Secretary of State for Business and Trade.
And Trade.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
See, there was a third time lucky.
It grows, yeah.
But he, there you go. But what isn't growing fast enough, according to Andrew Griffith? The economy. What's the government doing? Taxing too much.
Yep.
And if you're Andrew Griffith, you think, David Lammy, is he necessarily all over the detail of economic policy, particularly on business rates, which is a big campaign Andrew Griffiths is running? He is Griffith singular, rather. Mm-hmm. Andrew Griffiths was another Tory MP who you definitely wouldn't want to be mistaken for reasons that on a family radio station I won't get into. And he has been critical of the Chancellor in the past 24 hours for not U-turning far enough on business rates of pubs and restaurants. So maybe he'll bring that up, and maybe he'll be taking a gamble that David Lammy might not necessarily be wholly across the detail. But it would be remiss of the political team and officials not to brief him on that, given anyone who's been on Andrew Griffith's social media recently can tell what he's probably going to ask about.
Well, yes, and Patrick was a little rude about the PMQs prep team in Number 10 last week, so I should point out that you were a little rude. You said they didn't do much diligence, Patrick.
Oh, sorry.
And I can tell you they do, and they work very hard on it, so I'm sure they will. Just one thing, Hugo, if that's okay. When you have deputy PMQs, I think you really have two choices as the opposition of do you go to the deputy, as it were, and talk about either things he's said in the past or about his brief. So for David, that would probably be around, he was Foreign Secretary when we did Chagos. He was Foreign Secretary, obviously, so the China trip plays large, or maybe some stuff he said on Customs Union, or you go to Justice. Or your second route is to basically pretend the Deputy Prime Minister isn't there and use him as a proxy for the Prime Minister. So that would allow you to get into the business rates issue. It would allow you to get into the sort of weakness narrative they want to create. So you kind of have a binary choice in the opposition as to which way you're going to go on there. So let's see. I mean, I think it's hard to see how they don't ask about China and Chagos.
Well, look, a reminder, you can watch us on YouTube as well if you want to see what's going on in the Commons as well as here, although I'd imagine it's going to look like almost literally two bald men fighting over a comb. Let's get our first question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I start by echoing the Deputy Prime Minister's comments about Holocaust Memorial Day? We must never forget. May I also associate this side of the House with the condolences expressed by the Deputy Prime Minister to the family of Captain Philip Gilbert Muldowney. I also offer the condolences of the House to the family of Lord Flight, one of my predecessors in Arundel and South Downs. He served in Parliament with distinction for more than 2 decades. Mr. Speaker, after the Chancellor's U-turn yesterday, can the Deputy Prime Minister confirm that over 90% of retail, hospitality and leisure businesses will get nothing?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the Shadow Business Secretary to the dispatch box and join him? I remember Lord Flight well when I arrived in this House. It's always a pleasure to hear from the co-author of the mini-budget And the man who said that Liz Truss has the best plan to deliver for voters. Remember that? Of course, all of us want to see our pubs in good health and to support hospitality. That's why the Chancellor announced a £4 billion package of support. But yesterday, in addition, business rates for pubs and music venues will be cut by 15% this year and frozen for the next 2 years, and will review the methodology for valuing pubs in the future. I must say that contrasts with the party opposite, who of course saw 7,000 pubs close under their watch.
Oh, I think we lost that a bit there. No, maybe we'll get that a bit back. Patrick, going in on business rates.
Yeah, unsurprisingly, given that that's the only thing Andrew Griffith has been talking about for quite some time. And the answer you'd expect from a senior Labour politician asked about economic policy from the moral high ground by a Tory.
Mm-hmm.
Two words, Liz Truss. Again and again and again. If the rest of the questions follow this pattern, we could be in for a long 20 minutes or so.
Chris Wood, how welcome are you in pubs?
Still very welcome in Brighton, Kemp Town and Peacehaven, I hope. But yeah, very welcome at the moment. Yeah, the announcement yesterday I think has been welcomed, certainly on the Labour side and by business on it. I think it's interesting Griffiths has gone on this. As I say, you have a choice as to whether you pick the target of David or the target of the government.
Yep.
And he's obviously gone down the second
Sure.
route. So let's see if he manages to wind in the wider attack at either on David. Also, of course, at some point in this, as I said, Labour will want to make the argument about the Tories and reform and defections. The opposition will obviously want to make the point around the internal parts of the Labour Party this week. So it'll be interesting to see how they weave that in. And when you're writing the set, which we do, you can either have that as a straight question, or you can have a sort of rolling fire as you go along.
Sure.
And make sides. Let's see which one Andrew Griffith goes down. And I imagine he looks like he'll just drop it in as he goes through.
So David Lammy, he was very slow, very measured there.
He was
I remember
very deliberate.
last time how shouty he got. I was thinking, it reminded me of the fitness tracker I wear. That the most important thing it measures is it's not your heart rate, it's your heart rate variation.
Yes.
It's how quickly you go from fast to slow and back again. And David Lammy, I mean, you wonder how he's going to be sounding by the end of this session and how different it's going to be from how he sounded at the beginning.
It's interesting,
whether
though,
there'll be a cliff.
Because Andrew Griffith is pugnacious. He's he's
the business secretary.
He's the shadow business secretary.
Yeah.
He's something of an attack dog, or would see himself as an attack dog. So unless this is a deliberate bit of psychological torture from David Lammy to not give him what he wants. And as Chris said, by the way, the other obvious thing to go on if you have David Lammy in front of you for 6 questions is jury trials. And it's interesting they haven't gone on that.
Let's get the next question.
Mr. Speaker, he wants to talk about experience. I spent 25 years building businesses, creating jobs. He spent 25 years manufacturing grievance. And if the party opposite knew anything about business, they would know this is too little too late. Our high streets, their high streets, are bleeding out, and the Chancellor's handing out... They don't want to hear this, Deputy Speaker. Our high streets are bleeding out, and the Chancellor's handing out a box of sticking plasters. They can't even U-turn properly. Mr. Deputy Speaker, a senior advisor... Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, a senior advisor to Andy Burnham said yesterday the Chancellor just wants a cheap headline. Meanwhile, our high streets are being decimated. He's right, isn't he?
Lovely Prime Minister.
I've got to say, Mr. Speaker, he talks about business. We know what his plan for business is. This is the man who opposed the minimum wage and said it was, quote, simply something that legislators pass to make themselves feel good. Well, let me tell him, raising the minimum wage doesn't make us feel good. It changes lives. And Labour's proud of how we're supporting small business. And on small business, creating hospitality zones to cut red tape, greater licensing freedoms, very important, and tackling late payments. All of that supporting business. That's a heart cry to what small business saw before.
Chris, of the things that make you the dreams that make you sort of wake up sweating in the middle of the night, how bad is the one where in the chamber you accidentally accuse the Speaker of being the Deputy Speaker?
That's pretty bad. I mean, last time you should remember James Cartledge did it and he couldn't count to 6.
Yes, that's true.
At the moment,
yes.
at least Andrew Griffiths is doing better than that. I think it's safe to say that wasn't the tightest question in question 2 there.
No.
Also, it's slightly, again, when you're trying to set it up from the strategy point when you're working with the Prime Minister's team, that he's let David a bit off the hook here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's obviously an issue on business rates. Lots of pubs, including my constituency, are really seeing real challenges. And you could get into, there's some emotive cases you could put to David here. You could really pin him here. I thought that second question led him off a little. I mean, obviously, what the government did yesterday is the way out of it, and you saw some of the argument back on what the Conservative record is. But I think there's a better way of constructing that second question.
Well, what I'm struggling with about question 2 there is how, if you're planning this and you write it down, you consider that to be meaningfully different from question 1. Why there's nobody who goes, you've just done that, why are you going to do it again if you've got nothing else to bring to the equation?
Well, no, exactly. And I'm not entirely sure where we go with question 3, 4, 5 and 6. Maybe that's the point at which he starts talking about pubs in his lovely Arundel constituency.
It is a lovely constituency.
It is.
Just down the road from me.
It's a beautiful part of the world. Not as beautiful as Camptown and Peacehaven, of course, Chris. But, look, I think Andrew Griffith is also suffering a bit. I think everybody's suffering a bit, to be honest. I mean, David Lammy is quite deliberately, I think, bringing the mood down.
Yeah, that's true.
And he's not exactly geeing the Tory benches up, Andrew Griffith, in the way that Kemi has done in recent weeks. Interesting stat, by the way, from Damien McBride, Special Advisor to the Foreign Secretary. Obviously not busy in the Foreign Office now with the...
This is the same Damien McBride who was Gordon Brown's
They're very same.
henchman.
They're very same.
Yeah.
He says on Twitter, by my count, Andrew Griffith will be the 44th different person to stand at the dispatch box for PMQ since the once-a-week era began in 1997, and the David Lammy versus Andrew Griffith matchup will be the 25th different pairing since the 2015 election. Maybe the 25th best if this continues.
Right, let's get our next question.
Mr. Speaker, you don't make young people better off by putting them out of work. Mr. Speaker, his MPs are already banned from pubs. Where next? Shops, restaurants, hair salons. That may not make a difference to him or I, but for many of them, they should back our plan to scrap business rates. But they haven't got the backbone to cut welfare to pay for it. And it's not just business rates, Mr. Speaker. Under them, the cost of hiring is up. So could he tell the House how much more does it cost to hire a 21-year-old under Labour?
Deputy Prime Minister.
He talks about young people. The party opposite left a shameful legacy. 1 in 8 young people not earning or learning when they left office. We're investing a record amount in apprenticeships, which they had on its knees. We're creating talented excellence technical colleges for our young people, and Alan Bilman is doing a review on young people who are currently out of work. By contrast, they would freeze the minimum wage, oppose giving young people an increase. They've got nothing to say for the next generation.
Patrick, business rates, how vulnerable, I mean, on this kind of economic attack, how vulnerable is the government on this? Because I mean, there are parts of the media where it's sort of it's the daily stick that the government's been with. I think the Daily Mail today has business rates on the front. The Sun has a big story on pubs, calling Rachel Reeves' steps yesterday half measures. How worried are they?
Well, look, clearly the government is worried because it's executed a U-turn and is giving more money to the businesses that are affected. So look, even if parts of the media and the Tories and others are criticising it, clearly there is an awareness in the Treasury and in Downing Street there is a problem. Now, more broadly, there's a political danger for the government here on 2 fronts. The first is that anything that is seen to hit the high street is bad for politics, given that what was Labour's mandate in 2024? Or why did the Tories lose the trust of the public in 2024? For a number of reasons, but lots of people would say, look at the state of my high street, look at the state of this town. That feeling of national decline, which the Prime Minister has spoken about a lot. The second difficulty for Labour, it's a sort of cultural difficulty, is that having made lots of inroads with business before the election and having tried to build those relationships, a pretty consistent criticism from across business, particularly small and medium-sized business, is that the Labour Party just doesn't understand them. It's taxing them. It's imposing new regulatory requirements on them. Interesting, by the way, that Andrew Griffith is going on the minimum wage for young people, which is, of course, going up in the hope that it might eventually be equalised. So it's a sort of, there's the immediate danger of the policy, but there's the bigger sort of cultural, structural danger that I know serious people inside government are thinking about, but is nonetheless a vulnerability.
Yeah, and how upset are... I mean, I made a joke about pubs earlier, but when you get all the kind of sort of no Labour MPs welcome in my pub type thing, do MPs mind that? Do they feel persecuted? I mean, obviously, because... I mean, without wishing to diss your colleagues,
tell us you're the real victim.
I'm sure most Labour MPs can wander into a pub and people don't necessarily go, that's the Labour MP for 5 miles down the road. But do they mind just that kind of rhetoric?
I mean, look, no one wants to be barred from their local. Obviously, I mean that which I think, as I say, is a slightly overwritten story. But obviously, people are worried about MPs are worried about what they get in their postbox and what they hear in the street. I talk to pubs in my constituency, and they're obviously worried about some of the changes. But I will point out, just on the structure of this, the trouble Griffiths and the Tories have got here is obviously they can't run away from their record, and David's obviously got the pushback of 7,000 pubs closed under you with his Truss's
budget.
You said whatever to business. It's very hard for him to get away from that. And that's why, at the moment, I think we're probably in score draw territory at the moment, because it's very hard. The Conservatives aren't constructing that argument; they can't really get a hearing on it, and there's more than enough material to come back on. The truth is, on business rates, this has been a problem for a long, long time, and there's work that we did yesterday that I think is a big step forward on it. But this isn't David's main issue. Obviously, Griffiths has chosen his big issue, and he's not really landing much at the moment.
Well, I mean, on Lammy's style, the fact that he chose not to respond to the rather collegiate bald gag, the fact, I mean, I've met David Lammy several times. He's not a boring man. He's doing a good impression of one right now.
Yeah, indeed. But that's the game, isn't it? If you are minding the shop, business rates or no business rates, you want the boss to get home and nothing's blown up. So
defensive batting.
Yes, exactly.
There are 3 questions to come though.
Yeah,
there's
true.
There's a peroration coming in 6.
You're right.
Worry.
I should speed up. Let's get question 4.
Mr. Speaker, you can feel the Deputy Prime Minister's frustration. The Prime Minister's away, the Business Secretary's away, and here he is, left behind Lammy, the designated survivor, having to defend the indefensible. And it's very clear, he doesn't know the answer, Mr. Speaker, so let me tell him. The cost will be up £3,600 a year. Under Labour, businesses can't afford to hire. 1 in 6 young people can't find a job. This government is blocking people who just want to get on in life. People, Mr. Speaker, ambitious people like Andy from Manchester, having his dreams crushed by Labour. So could the Deputy Prime Minister explain why unemployment has gone up almost every month they've been in office?
I'm replying to this.
Check his fact. 500,000 people in work more than a year ago under us. The Shadow Business Secretary is in no position to lecture anyone about U-turns, by the way. This man was Boris Johnson's net zero business champion. Now he opposes the renewable investment, creating jobs and opportunities right across the country.
Yeah, OK. A couple of things there. The Andy from Manchester joke. I feel, Patrick, Chris as well, if you're going to lean into a joke, do a better joke. Do it properly. Give it a bit more welly.
Welly is the key word. The delivery leaves much to be desired.
As does the joke.
Yes, is the joke.
Yeah.
That question, I think he's sort of struggling. And to be fair to him, it's the first time he's done this, but he's not deviating from his script at all. So to say you can feel the Deputy Prime Minister's frustration.
Yeah.
So like, well,
can you?
I don't think
could you yesterday when you wrote this down? Yeah.
No, it's a beautiful. Cut to David Lammy and Rachel Reeves, who both sort of looked completely unfrustrated, if not a bit embarrassed for Andrew Griffiths. So, yeah, it just goes to show that you need a sort of degree of fleetness of foot, and it's hard to do that when you're inexperienced. And again, sort of, there is a through line here about Labour not understanding business, as I was saying before, imposing you requirements on business, that sort of thing. I'm not sure Andy from Manchester fits into that, and also I don't think he's doing enough to emphasise that through line here, Andrew Griffiths.
I thought it was pretty generous to put Andy in the youth unemployment bracket as well.
He looks young.
Andy is many things, but I'm not sure he's in the under-21s bracket there. But yeah.
Yeah. The excuse me. The thing about so sorry. The thing about as you mentioned before, Chris, about him being able to just hit Griffiths' record again and again and again and again. You had that again there with Boris Johnson and Net Zero.
Yeah, and that's the basic structure of pretty much any answer that the Prime Minister or Deputy Prime Minister give. They'll give a factual answer on the policy. They'll give an attack on on the Conservative record, and then they'll pivot out to a wider message. Now, it is question 4, Hugo. We have not heard reform mentioned once.
No, it's interesting.
So let's just see where we get to.
Maybe they're saving that for the back.
But that's normally what I mean by if you see the structure of the answer, you would then pivot it out and try and draw a comparator with an opposition party.
Let's get question 5.
Mr. Speaker, the thing he didn't want to say is that every Labour government leaves office with unemployment higher than when they arrived. And there's a reason for that. They don't understand what it takes to be an employer. They don't understand business. They're strangling business with their red tape, and they're about to make things infinitely worse. So will he tell us his government's own estimate of the cost to business of the Unemployment Act?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I'm going to take no lectures from you on business. My father was run out of business under the Thatcher government. I know what it's like to grow up under a Tory government. And whilst we're talking about it, 26 Tory MPs and counting have already defected to reform, and now they're all counting down, Mr. Speaker, because today is 100 days until the Tory transfer window slams shut. It's going to be the longest and most disloyal transfer saga since Sol Campbell left Spurs. And the member for Clapton, I don't know where he is, has signed 3 white ringers in the past fortnight.
Chris, I remember, I think it was John Lennon joking that George Harrison Beatles song, by verse 3, he'd always start talking about God. And it's like Labour PMQ's answers.
We got to question 5.
By question 5, they've always started talking about reform.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I don't want to be too critical of Andrew Griffiths here, genuinely, but that question really did just allow David to pivot out and go to where everyone. Sure. It didn't pin him down. You know, there's lots of ways you can ask a question. You could have picked a pub that was about to close down. You could have talked about how much it's gone up. You could have given a quote that was really hard to get away from. Just saying about the Employment Rights Bill, which, by the way, there is no issue Labour MPs would rather you talk about than the Employment Rights Bill. It just gives David an opportunity to talk to that. But it was just a really easy way out, I thought. And obviously, David, I'd say the macro argument Labour want to get to is that the Conservatives are this feeder club for reform now. And that just allowed him to get there at 5.
When it comes to macro arguments like that, and indeed political strategy and how it leads into PMQs, when you're planning it, do you have something stuck up on the wall that goes, remember to refer back to this? You know, like don't get right the way through your whole thing and not mention reform. You know, are there kind of like the sort of the bells you got to hit?
Yes, I mean, you should always see PMQs as, you know, as I say, why does Keir quite enjoy doing it? It's because it's his one chance a week where he really gets to land his big strategic message or land an attack on either reform or the Greens, as he did last week, or Lib Dems. And he'll have in his mind, you know, we'll go through the questions, there are factual answers to each of these. So he'll have prepared business rates, he'll have prepared China, he'll have prepared Chagos. But he'll also have a list of, you know, this is the line I want to land on reform. So the story gets run. This is the line I want to run here. These are the 2 jokes I want to get in at some point. And so he will have those in his head. and I would say this, wouldn't I? Because we have a special relationship, as you know. But Keir's been doing this for a long time. He's good at making sure he gets in the prepared bits, and David's got that now clearly in question 5. So the skill of the opposition really should be to try and stop you doing that. That's kind of why I was saying that Griffiths was allowing him an open question there to unload.
Patrick, this is working out all wrong for the Tories, I would say. I think Lammy is not putting in his most watchable performance, I would say, but nonetheless, Griffith is sort of on the defensive, even though he's asking the questions. Yes,
somehow. I imagine they've maybe slightly... What was it George W. Bush said? They've misunderestimated David Lammy.
Yeah.
As in they thought, they had an idea of David Lammy's weaknesses or his excitability, and he's totally wrong-footed them. And also I think they hadn't quite appreciated the extent to which he'd repeatedly turned it back on them.
People shouldn't underestimate. I mean, David's been an MP for 25 years. He's a very, very good Commons performer. He's been around the block in every role. So this is, he hasn't been in this chair too often, but he's a very good Commons performer. So and also again on PMQs, when you're sat there in the position I said like a minute to 12, and you're thinking, what's your worst nightmare of questions you'd get? It's not this set, is it?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's true.
There's so many things that you could have thought. Is it jury trials? Is it going to be quotes about Chagos? Is it whatever? This really isn't putting him in that nightmare position at the moment.
I mean, you wonder though that he's not feeling a bit. I can do more than this. He doesn't want to.
Well, you just saw that with
rear
5.
up and dance.
Right?
You saw a bit of that. You did see a bit of that.
He basically thought, I don't really need to engage too closely in the substance of this now. I can get on to my attack, and that's why I said at the beginning that it allows him the opportunity.
But if I know anything about the man, he's going to want to get some hefty thing into his reply on 6, whatever question 6 is. Let's get question 6.
Thank you. I don't know what's in his head, Mr. Speaker. It's our party that is getting stronger, and overnight. Overnight, Mr. Speaker, we learned that the former Deputy Prime Minister has got 80 names. On Sunday, we learned that the Health Secretary's allies claimed that he's got 200 names, and oddly, 50 of them want the Mayor of Greater Manchester, who's not even in this MP. Mr. Speaker, they're supposed to be running the country, and once again, small businesses across this country will see that he didn't answer the question. So I'll tell him, £1 billion a year. That is the burden to businesses of their bill. So there we have it, Mr. Speaker. They've no answers for small business. There's no relief coming. They don't care about high streets. They don't care about hotels, restaurants, farmers, or young people. Won't the Deputy Prime Minister admit what the members behind him are thinking? That it's not the Prime Minister going to China that's the problem, it's the fear that he might come back.
Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he's not going to get this gig again, is he? Let's face it. Mr. Speaker, I've set out our position very clearly. This was the week when the leader of the opposition told Desert Islandists that Britain needs to learn to queue again. And Tory MPs have taken her quite literally. They're lining up outside the member for Clacton's office while they squabble about the damage that they did to our country. Labour this week is capping ground rents, cutting the cost of living and rebuilding our public services. That's the difference a Labour government makes, and there's much more to come.
Patrick, direct quote, he's got 80 names, he's got 200 names, and he's not even in this MP. What does it mean?
Yeah, not a classic. I think he means not even it. Actually, I don't know what that means.
Not even an MP?
Not even
in this house? I mean, assuming that he's probably reading that out.
Yes.
And
who wrote that?
And actually, when you compare that with Lammy with his prepared comebacks, you watch something like this and you think, okay, the reason why they are ill-matched is because Lammy's a better performer. But actually, this is on material as well.
Yes.
This is on the work that's gone in beforehand.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I mean, I don't want to criticise the material because the 80 MPs and 200 MP stories are Times and Sunday Times stories about Angela Rayner and Wes Streeting.
That's the background behind the material.
Well, exactly. You know, I think if he could have done much better. Yeah, look, I have to say brutally, David Lammy is right. I don't think Andrew Griffith will be getting that gig again. It was a nice idea. You know, the argument wasn't entirely. It wasn't the weakest argument he could have made, but I just think the execution wasn't there at all, sadly. And, you know, he finally got the chamber cheering, but it was in mockery of him, sadly.
Yeah.
He couldn't even get his own benches cheering, but he could get the Labour benches cheering, and I enjoyed whoever the MP was who said, finally a funny
joke. There was the it's our party that is getting stronger was finally the funny joke. It reminded me of the one about, you know, when a New Zealander emigrates to Australia, they say both the IQ of both countries goes up, which is...
I've heard variations on that with every Tory defection to reform.
Yeah, exactly. I've been waiting to hear that one this week. Look, Chris, I mean, obviously Lammy has won this exchange. Is there a bit in Downing Street that will go, you know what, even though he won that exchange, the drip of what looks like Labour failures on the high street, Labour failures on the business rates, this mood of Labour being anti-business, actually, you know what, that will have landed, that will have percolated through. That is still a problem.
Well, I think that the first thing is obviously the PMQs team there will think David did really well. I think he had a good performance. As I say, Griffiths managed to count to 6, but didn't really do much else that was damaging.
I think if he stopped at 5, you might have been happy, actually. Yeah.
To be fair, as the trade unionist of MPs and PMQs people, I'd like to say, look, it is harder than it looks. And
it looks hard. Don't be wrong.
And you know, when
you're talking to a man very capable of bodging a script all by himself, so I get that.
I sometimes get the perception, you know, that people think PMQs is very easy to do. It is difficult, and when you give someone it as a one-off, right? You know, it is very difficult to just jump in and do it. You have to be a very high caliber person to do that. It took Kemi a lot of weeks to even get near being good about it. Keir, when he was first leading the opposition, it took him quite a long time. But you do have to learn into the job. So
some might say it's still taking him.
Maybe I'm being a bit generous. On the macro position on it, look, as I said at the beginning when I said Keir was a bit frustrated that we'd been knocked off message at the end of last week, the government actually thinks they've got a decent story at the moment around what we're doing domestically, whether that's to say on things like warm homes, like a leasehold we announced yesterday was really good and really positive on our side. And on the international scene, Keir is obviously now trying to, at every point, link what he's doing internationally to domestically. So he's saying, I'm in China because I'm thinking of the economy at home. So I think they are less worried than your question implied on that.
Sure.
But obviously, as you saw from yesterday, they're not oblivious to the fact that we needed to do more on business rates, and we do need to work very hard on that issue.
Well, look, stick with us. Up next, Stefan Boscia will be with us with the best of the rest. This is Hugo Rifkind here on Times Radio.
Finally, a funny joke.
And Callum.
Let's take a look now at some of the other exchanges of Prime Minister's questions. And Times Politics newsletter editor Stefan Boscia is here. Hello, Stefan.
Hello, Hugo. How you doing?
I'm all right. What have you got for us?
So I believe the first one we're listening to is from Tory MP John Lamont, who is asking a bit about the leadership speculation that is still swirling around Keir Starmer.
Let's hear that.
The Scottish press is full of stories about the plot by Scottish Labour MPs to bring down the Prime Minister. One Scottish Labour MP said he's terrible. Another Scottish Labour MP said the handling of the budget had been incompetent. And yet another Scottish Labour MP predicted that Scottish Labour would be slaughtered in May's election. They're not wrong, are they, Deputy Prime Minister?
Deputy Prime Minister.
the people of Scotland have a big decision later on this year. Certainly not to vote Conservative, to get rid of SNP and vote Labour. And I and my colleagues will be campaigning every single day to bring that about.
Chris, I mean, it does suit Keir Starmer not being here. This has, when it comes to leadership speculation, when it comes to the tenuousness of his own position, has it been his worst week yet?
As I say, I think it's frustrated at the end of the week of how it went and where we are. I mean, look, the party is pretty focused actually. On Monday I was at PLP. PLP was very good, and the focus really is on trying to win the by-election in Manchester and go from there really. So, and also I think, as I say, PMQs, when Keir's there, it gives him an opportunity to talk to his backbenchers and to reassure them and to reaffirm it. And I thought last week he did that extremely well when we were on Greenland and Chagos, etc.
I mean, given that, you wouldn't necessarily be expected to agree, but given that you're not going to win the Manchester by-election.
Well, it's very early. We haven't even picked a candidate yet, Hugo.
I'll call it. Given that
Tom's radio calls it.
And given that May might not be super, the mood's got to be a bit grim, hasn't it?
Look, it's a difficult. Obviously, the polls are what the polls are. It's a difficult time always when you're a year and a half, 2 years into government on it. But as I say, the Prime Minister's been making, I think, a really strong case for what we're doing on the international scene in the last few weeks and how that's relating domestically. And we have been rolling out a lot of good policy things, as I say, on leasehold last week, on send, on warm homes. There's a lot of stuff there we need to get through and make that argument on it. And, the PLP, I'm not going to pretend there aren't challenges, but equally, the vast majority of the PLP want to focus on what this government was elected to do and get on with, and it doesn't want to spend its time talking about itself. And that's why Keir keeps saying every minute we spend that's not on cost of living and is on ourselves is a minute we're losing.
Stefan?
Yeah, well, I think that, it's particularly the question I like to highlight as well, because talking about Scotland, and I think that it's a real problem for Starmer, I think, the fact that, the angriest MPs I've spoken to over the last 6 months, there tend to be Scottish ones and Welsh ones. There's nearly 100 of them in Parliament. And if Labour does come third in Wales, does come third in Scotland, a lot of them will be looking at their seats and saying that, how are we possibly going to survive this? Now, I really do find it very interesting, some of the comms around cost of living and really trying to push this, message home. And I was speaking to one Scottish MP yesterday who was a bit more chipper than Lamont was, and sort of said, well, if you go to people on the doorstep in Scotland, they're starting to feel the difference a bit. They're starting to feel, more disposable income because mortgage rates coming down. Slowly, energy prices are getting better. But I still think that's a very, very difficult argument to land when there has been 18 months of what people see as dysfunction. And ultimately, I'd sort of be interested to hear what Chris about how you feel about the situation in Scotland and whether that is the biggest barrier right now.
Well, hell of a thing if Labour does come third in Scotland.
Well, it's come third in Scotland at several consecutive elections, so that's not necessarily big. But in this context,
right now up against a fearsomely unpopular government in Scotland that just turns out not to be quite as unpopular as the government in Westminster.
To be fair to the Labour Party, and as I say that, I can hear Chris's colleagues fainting that such a thing could be possible. I think there are Scottish MPs are very fatalistic, as you say, Stefan. The optimistic case is, one, Anas Sarwar outpolls other party leaders. Two, the Labour Party is still very well organised and well resourced in Scotland. Look at the by-election it won in Hamilton last October. And obviously mapping that out is mapping that onto a Holyrood election with a proportional system as well is difficult. But, the question will be, if Anas Sarwar can make the question, do you necessarily want to give the SNP, the keys to their third decade in government, is tricky.
If there was a Tory or indeed a Reform government in Westminster, I think there's no way in hell Labour wouldn't be winning the election in Scotland.
Just to come to Scotland, I would politely remind people that when Keir became leader, we had one MP in Scotland. We've now got 36. So it's not that he's not. We have a good record in Scotland.
Taken.
The party, as Patrick says, is in a strong position. Anas has been really effective at organising it up there. And, those elections will be a referendum on 20 years of the SNP's record. And it is interesting at PMQs, by the way, that every week the SNP have a question, when Flynn has a question, he never asks a question about the NHS in Scotland. He never asks about education. He always just asks a snippy question. A good question. Flynn is obviously a very good performer, but he never defends the SNP's record at any point. And that is where we want to get to for the next few months in Scotland. I've just one final point. Scotland and Wales, you're right, are absolutely vital elections at this point. And obviously that was part of the thing that weighed on the NEC's mind about where resources should be put over the coming months, and whether, having an all-out Greater Manchester election would divert resources away from the absolutely vital contests that we have to have in Scotland and Wales.
Stefan.
Next, we're hearing from Daisy Cooper, who's filling in as the Liberal Democrats' speaker this week. So she's asking about the PM's trip to China.
Mr. Speaker, whilst the Chinese regime still holds British citizen Jimmy Lai captive in prison, and whilst the Chinese regime continues to hunt down pro-democracy protesters on the streets of Britain with bounties on their heads, the British Prime Minister has gone cap in hand to China to ask for a trade deal on the promise of a super embassy from which the Chinese regime will continue to spy on us. The Chinese regime remains undeterred in its illegal actions against the UK and our citizens. So can I ask the Deputy Prime Minister to name one single consequence that the Chinese regime will face if they do not stop their campaign of espionage and repression?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, China matters, and ignoring them would be a dereliction of duty. We will build a consistent, long-term and strategic approach grounded in reality. I set that out in the China audit statement I made a few months ago, and that is what our allies do. President Trump, Macron, Chancellor Merz, Prime Minister Carney, all are visiting and engaging. We'll cooperate where we can, and I'm sure in areas like climate, she would expect us to cooperate, and we will challenge in areas where we disagree. That's the way that we deliver for the public of this country.
Stefan, I mean, the Lib Dems, they're becoming the foreign policy guys, because they ask the questions that the Tories don't want to, and Labour can't ask themselves.
Well, absolutely. I mean, in other circumstances, it really helps them for Trump, because the Tories and Reform can't really attack Trump. And Starmer, even though he was stronger last week, there's a certain limit to what he can say. So they've really found a niche there. This week, again, doing it on China. And I think it poses a really interesting question as Starmer goes today. I mean, obviously, the PM said many times that he won't trade economic prosperity for national security, and he will welcome investment from China as long as it doesn't affect our national security. But what I sort of observed is I really think the government's very unclear of what that line is, and they're still always trying to work out where they should be setting it. I mean, case in point is this £1.5 billion investment in Scotland for Chinese investment for wind turbines into a wind turbine factory. They're still not sure whether they'll accept this, the government. And this is the sort of thing where if it does go ahead, I'd raise real questions, and I think a lot of people would, because frankly, after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the one thing we should have learnt is not to be over-reliant on countries like China, Russia, and the access of authoritarian countries for energy, for critical things like this. Because when we do come into conflict with them, they can very quickly turn the lights off. And when I raised this point to a very, very senior member of the government, one of Chris's colleagues, I was mocked and saying, "What are China going to do? Turn off wind turbines?" I said, "Yeah, that's exactly the problem." And that was the whole point of Securenomics, which was Labour's policy platform until very, very recently. So, I think that this is something which Starmer still hasn't really reconciled with, and I still think that the public need to hear where he does draw that line.
Patrick.
I think that's a very fair argument from Stefan, I think. But I can imagine what the Prime Minister would say. It would be a variation on what your senior member of the government said to you, Stefan, and it would be a variation on what he said to Ed Davey last week, which is basically to snort derisively and say, last week you were saying we shouldn't deal with America. This week you're saying we shouldn't deal with China. What is the Lib Dem economic vision? So they're very, and not that this is about the Lib Dems, but it gets to all those things about the government are true. But I also think it's an interesting strategic question for the Lib Dems. Right, they're very, very good at attack, but Lib Dem MPs will be coming out of that, I think, asking, well, what do we stand for? We're very good at attacking the government or the Tories. What do we stand for? And I think with every attack they make from every different angle, I think that sort of maybe becomes harder to discern.
Chris, finally and briefly, how worried is the Prime Minister about looking weak on foreign policy? Because he's had a difficult time with America. He's had a rocky time after starting strong with Russia. The China stuff, it looks damaging, all of it.
I would say this, wouldn't I? But I think actually his record internationally is very, very well regarded, and I think he's built a relationship with Trump that is in the UK's interest, whether that's on security, defence, etc. Where we got to last week, Trump apologising for the appalling comments he made in Afghanistan and moving on Greenland. Keir is a central part in getting to that, and he's spoke with Trump about this. And he's built, the relationship with China. They are the world's second largest economy. You cannot, the Liberal Democrat and the Conservative position is to ignore them and to just not engage with the world's second largest economy. I just think that's a fundamentally unserious position. So look, and I say last week in PMQs, Keir was at his best when he was on this issue. So I don't think he's worried about that at all. And I think he's carved out a pretty clear and responsible foreign policy for him.
Yeah. Chris Ward, thank you very much indeed for being with us.
Pleasure.
Sorry to rush towards the end. Stefan Boscia, always a pleasure to have you here. Stefan's newsletter will be in your inboxes extremely shortly. Patrick Maguire has already run away, perhaps not wanting to look me in the eye because his podcast, The State of It, is up against my podcast, Politics Unpacked, which you may be listening to right now at an awards ceremony this evening. And I was going to offer to arm wrestle him, but no, he's run away. That's just how
running
it works.
Scared.
Running scared. Thank you, Stefan. Thank you, Chris. Great to have both of you here. Up next, it is, of course, The Departure Land. This is Hugo Rifkind here on Times Radio.
Chloe Tilley and Callum MacDonald on Times Radio Breakfast with Visit Scotland. Discover Times Radio's essential weekend briefing, where intelligent conversation meets incisive analysis of all the big stories making the headlines, exploring the wider